my name's Lear, and welcome to the Thoughtful Leadership podcast from Ambitious. Over the next few weeks and months, we'll be speaking to a range of individuals around thoughtful leadership and what it takes to drive purpose through business. We'll be speaking to entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, MDs, academics, and people who are just passionate about thoughtful leadership and purpose-led business. Have you ever wondered what it takes to drive purpose through business? Perhaps you're a leader who's thinking about driving that change, or perhaps you're working for an organisation and really want to understand more about purpose. Well, my guest today is passionate about the topic. He is currently Chief Customer Officer at Homes England. Prior to this, he was Head of SME at Barclays Bank and has a wealth of experience of driving leadership and change through the banking sector. In his part-time, he is studying for a Master's in Equality and Diversity in Society and Business. Welcome to the podcast, Ian Workman.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Well, let's start with that purpose piece, because I think it's really important. I'm sure lots of listeners will be thinking about why that is so important in today's world.
Yeah. No, it's really important to me. And I think it's something that's become more important to me as I've become a leader and understanding what is it I want to achieve. We often talk about peeling back the layers and seeing what's inside you, peeling back the DNA. And I think it comes back to my childhood. Mum worked in a shop. Dad was blind and was a piano tuner. Grandfather worked in the steelworks in South Wales. And there was very much a community. And so, we didn't have a lot of money, but a very happy childhood. And I think it was that community. And we understood why we were there. And I think as I got further into my career, I started thinking about, well, why am I here? What am I trying to achieve with life? And actually understanding as a leader, I was in a privileged position, particularly at Barclays, where I could influence and make decisions that had impact. And the moment it really came to me is when I started working with some social businesses who really got purpose. And that's continued with me. And that's sort of how I've ended up at Homes England, because Homes England's purpose is to build homes. And I'm particularly thinking about the 150,000 children every day in England that wake up in temporary accommodation. Wow. And that really resonates to me and think, that's why I'm here and I can give something back.
Fascinating. And I heard you talk about social impact and social impact businesses and the amount that they drive in the UK economy. I think it's 60 billion. Yeah. And also the importance of their role. Can you talk a bit about that? Yeah,
well, let me tell you a little bit about the journey I came to, because I think it's an interesting story. So I was a school banker. I was all about profit. That's how I analysed lending. And one of my team said to me, you must come and meet this catering business. Didn't think much of it because I went and met lots. I had 1 million customers at Barclays. So I went and saw businesses all the time. And I came to this business catering company in London. They do corporate lunches, all that stuff. So nothing particularly special about them. They started talking about their social purpose and how they work with homeless people. And then they introduced me this guy who's washing the dishes. Let's call him Fred. And Fred and I are very similar age group. We had children the same age. And then it stopped. Because Fred, his whole adult life has struggled with drugs. And that had led to him getting divorced. He didn't have contact with his family. He became homeless. He was really struggling. And he talked about his story one day that he was in basically a squat with, let's call them friends. And they took some drugs. And the following morning he woke up and he was the only one that was still alive. And that was his wake-up call, because he realised that he had a lucky escape there. Absolutely. And his journey took him to Shelter, who then introduced him to this catering business. And the catering business worked with Shelter to employ homeless people, because to get a home, you need a job, you need an income, you need an address. And what they do, they don't just supply you with a job, they supply you with accommodation. Only a bedsit. And he said to me, Ian, I'm living like a king. He said, my life has turned around because of this business. And I started talking to the business owner about his purpose, and he said, look, I'm a business. I'm here to make a profit. I'm not a charity. But at the same time, I can make a difference. And if I can employ more Freds, look at the difference I'm making in my business. And that's the reason I get up every day. And that led me into the journey of social businesses that have real social impact. And then it started thinking, well, is it only social businesses? Can all leaders have some impact? And I think the answer is yes, you can. And so that started me on this journey around purpose.
Amazing. That's so, hugely thought-provoking, isn't it? When you explore and discover that, that sort of story. Tell me a bit about the world of Barclays, because I think for most people, you look into the banking sector and see it as reasonably traditional and reasonably rigid. And I know things have changed a lot. How has it changed over 30 years? And what are some of the challenges that you must have had to sort of address?
I'm going to get my age away now, aren't I? But I think, look, the one thing to say about banking, it's always been at the forefront of technology. I remember as a junior cashier that we introduced debit cards and having to try and persuade customers not to use their checkbooks anymore. Today you think, wow, when was the last time you used a check? But that was a real thing. And so the one thing that banking has done is innovate technology over the years. And you can see that increasingly. And that has made a big difference the way we do business. Particularly for small businesses, it's much easier nowadays to have a small business and transact. When I started in my career in the 90s, your small businesses were very local. You catered for the local community. You supply the local community. People will remember their butcher. They'll remember their local wholesaler, etc. Whereas now, if you're a small business, you can set up anywhere. I remember I was at Barclays, there was a study about where was the biggest number of startups. It was actually in Cornwall at that time, and particularly for over 50s. Because people were leaving their corporate lives deciding, I don't want to retire, I want to set my own business, but I also want to live in Cornwall. Of course, technology can do that. And banking has been at the forefront of that. And I think that's the reason, particularly the big banks would argue that they've been very successful in supporting businesses. I think what's really interesting now is, particularly over the past 10 years, is the number of new banks that have come to market. And that was a strategic decision by the regulators to encourage startups. And they've been very successful in delivering the next stage of innovation.
Is that like Starling and things like that?
Like Starling's a great example. You've got Aleka. You've got lots and lots of different examples where they're really using technology to help. In payment services, you've got people like Stripe, making it a lot easier for businesses to transact. And to be fair, to take on some of the corporates, as a small business to say, I've got a friend of mine's got a very small business, tiny business, babyware. And she's a mum, 3 kids, selling probably high-end babyware, baby clothes. She's able to do that from home in their garage and the business. What a great idea, and being able to people to go out there and live their dreams because of the technology that's been delivered.
And I think SMEs make up to 99.9%.
It's huge. I think it was about 95% when I last looked. In terms of number of businesses, 95% of businesses are SMEs. Now, clearly, slightly different corporates employ more people just because they've got more people, but hugely important. And it's interesting when I talk to younger people, so I've got, teenage children, they're really bought into this purpose and they're less bought into the corporate life. So when I was a junior banker, you're expected to work whatever hours you were needed and whenever you were needed. Younger people are starting to say, I want that. I want some purpose. I want a life. Maybe I don't want to work for a corporate. And I think it's going to be interesting for businesses. And they're going to be looking at leaders to say, I want to work for you.
So it's actually a major recruitment strategy, isn't it? This kind of purpose piece as well, ensuring after your future as an organisation, attracting the right talent.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's about, in terms of attracting talent, but also the right customers, because your customer demographics are going to change. And your customers are going to start saying, well, where do you source your goods from? How green are you? What is your purpose? And they're going to be attracted to those businesses. And some of the research suggests that consumers will pay a premium for that. Not huge, but they will pay a slightly more where they think, I'll pay for that because I want to support that business.
It's really interesting. And I'm interested in your experience as the actual leader of a large part of the Barclays business in the UK and driving that forward, and how things changed and some of the barriers that potentially existed in the early days and that were removed, and how you manage some of those challenges.
Yeah, the social business is a really good example because, I was a complete convert to this. But one of the things social businesses told me was it was very difficult to borrow money. It was very difficult to get lending through the major banks. And also that, being candid, the banks used to use it as a sponsorship opportunity. So they would see their way of supporting social business would be to sponsor an award. But actually what social business is was some real help on the ground. Now, one of the challenges from a lending perspective, but again, too technical, is banks like to see retained profits. You've made some money, you made £100, you take £50 out as dividend to pay yourself, and you keep £50 back for a rainy day or to invest in the business. That's sort of how it works. Social businesses make the profit, but rather than retaining it, a lot of the time they will give it back. So in the example I use, they might give it to shelter to say, right, okay, I made £100 this year. I'm going to keep 50. I'm going to leave £25 in the business, but I'm going to give you £25, which makes your balance sheet not as strong, which banks don't like. And so one of the challenges I had was how do you create a proposition that takes into account they were profitable and that payment to the social provider was discretionary. And believe it or not, I had to go to Italy to find the model. There was a bank in Italy called Banco Primo, which was spun out of one of the major Italian banks post-banking crisis. Right. It was purely set up as a loss-making operation for the banks to be seen to be supporting businesses they wouldn't normally support. So it was, from the major bank's point of view, it was like, well, let's just put some money into this and we can help some businesses, but we know that those shed a load of money on it. Really interesting. It became the most profitable part of their business.
Wow.
Because if you think about it, a social business will likely have investors that have also bought into the purpose and won't want to see the business fail. Because if the business fails, they're not supporting the social purpose anymore. And therefore, actually, the investors were much more supportive than perhaps a traditional business. And so this was the model I had to go and explain to Barclays. But actually, this is the benefit of it. Now, progress was slow and it wasn't easy, but there was a change in mindset. Now, it's 3 years since I've been at Barclays. Like, I don't know what the situation is today, but from what I read, I know a lot of the major banks now. Lloyds, for example, are very focused on supporting housing in the UK. So I can see there's a mind shift change around that.
Well, I think to your point, it's such an important piece, isn't it? And there's so many people talking around purpose. Yeah. So all organisations are having to sort of take that leap and shift. But harder in some than others, obviously. And it's easier in a way when you're starting up, isn't it? Because you can drive purpose through the core of your business.
Well, it is. And I think if you're a leader, if you've been brought up in a certain way and your training, your experience tells you to operate in a certain way, what you're trying to do is change yourself. You're trying to change your thinking. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of reverse mentoring, because actually I call myself a steward as a leader, because my job is to make sure that the business that I'm involved with is, succeeds way past my retirement, etc. So how am I looking forward to what does the business look like in 5-10 years? What do my consumers look like? What do my colleagues look like? What are they going to want? Because I need to do a bit of prediction. I need to look into that crystal ball. And actually, by talking to young people, I did a great event with some graduates recently, got them to present. Some of the ideas are naive, and a bit thinking, well, that's never going to fly. But that's just down to their lack of experience. But other ideas were like, okay, there might be something here. Maybe if you just go look at this and see whether there's anything we can do here.
And reverse mentoring, explain that concept to the listeners.
Traditional mentoring is I'm an experienced leader. I've had a good career, and I would mentor somebody probably more junior than me to help them with their career. Give them advice and support. Reverse mentoring is me going to somebody who's probably, in my case, probably in their early 20s at the start of their career. Therefore, I'm not going to them for career advice. What I'm going to them is saying, what do you think about this? What would your peer group think? How do you think you would react if I did this? And it's really, really important to me to get that feedback, because I'm trying to, that bit of excitement you've got, that bit of, it is naivety, but when you're a bit younger, there's less rules. You haven't had the scars. Anything is possible. Yeah. And as the older you get, the more experience you get, you become a little bit more risk averse. And actually being talking to a younger person, you sort of think, okay, maybe I should. Maybe I remember doing this, and maybe I've actually stopped doing it, and I need to go and try something new.
A lot of people say, don't they, it's the naivety that drives that entrepreneurship.
Absolutely.
As you said, it's that kind of, you get older, you a bit more risk averse, you've been around the block, you kind of think about all the barriers more than actually opportunities. Exactly.
And I think it becomes a bit more closed thinking. And I think just having that alternative view, I think is really important, particularly again at leadership, because my peer group are people like me. And therefore, when I'm talking to my peer group, whether that be my execs at Homes England or it's the board, they're like me. They're probably similar age groups. They've probably got similar career patterns. They've probably got the same wounds. And therefore, I'm not going to get that challenge that I do get from younger people. So I definitely recommend it.
I've heard that a lot, that feedback culture. And I think that's all part of that collaborative leadership as well, isn't it? The importance of engaging different people. And I think, again, you know, I wanted to sort of talk to you a little bit about and get your thoughts on, obviously, again, banking industry and a lot of industries, you still see a lot of white middle class men and women progressively now. But, you know, how did that change over time at Barclays, and why is that so important that there is a more diverse workforce?
Look, I mean, the studies, McKinsey in particular, have done a lot of studies to show that where you've got diversity at board and exec level, you actually get more profit because you've got that diversity of thinking. So there's a great quote from, I forgot her name now, she's president of the European Bank. And she said, if Lehman Brothers were Lehman sisters, the banking crash wouldn't have happened, which is really interesting and really controversial. Who knows whether she's right or not. The point she's making, it was a very white middle-class male-dominated board and organisation, and therefore there was lack of diversity. And I've seen it change. I mean, I remember back in the 90s, female colleagues weren't allowed to wear trousers. And you just think, incredible that a corporate would even dictate such a thing. And, you know, it's still even then in the 90s, which to me doesn't feel that long ago. But anyway, you know, you went on maternity leave. The presumption was you probably wouldn't come back. You certainly wouldn't have a career when you had children. So it was really difficult for females to progress. And then the network that we used to do was very male orientated. Now, it has changed for the better, I have to say. I think, you know, the FCA has some sort of instructions and rules in place around diversity and ensuring that on boards. I think that has helped bring it to the agenda. I think execs and boards are a lot more conscious of that. I'm for sure I'm right that we still don't have any longer a female CEO of a bank anymore, which is interesting. I think it's looking at, okay, we've still got a long way to go on this. And then when you take diversity even further, if you think, okay, you might have some females, but actually, where's the ethnicity?
Yeah,
and sexual orientation, all the rest of the richness that diversity can bring. There's still a long way to go. But you actually come back to social businesses, 60% of social businesses are operated by women.
Wow. Okay, interesting. And you talked a bit about that kind of recruitment strategy and the importance of diversity and, you know, that old, you know, there are many businesses that still look at the degree level performance.
I don't think
that's
one.
Shifted a lot.
Yeah.
And I know that there is definitely a renewed focus on kind of looking at a more diverse approach. How were you able to sort of shift that within Barclays?
Yeah. I mean, look, degree level qualification just annoys me so much. I haven't got a degree. You know, circumstances where I started my career at 18. So any job that says degree level qualification, that discounts me. Yeah. So you're saying I'm not a good person for your job because I have a degree. But it's not just that. For me, there are so many people, particularly today, when you've got tuition fees at £9,000, you know, etc. Going to university is expensive and it's not accessible to everybody, particularly people from social backgrounds where, you know, you just can't afford to do that, or there's a need for you to support your family, you could be a carer, etc. And therefore, the minute you put degree level qualification on a job advert, you are discounting all those people who might be more capable than the graduate, but because they couldn't get there, you've discounted them. So it really, really annoys me when people put that, because you exclude that population.
And did Barclays have that? Did they originally? I would imagine there was.
So for the graduate scheme, obviously there was a grad scheme, but that outside the grad scheme, to be fair, no, it wasn't. You know, it was on there. At Homes England's, one of the things I've had change is we don't say degree level anymore. We've got a great head of HR, Jackie, who totally buys into this, and she talks about, well, let's put or life equivalent experience, and I love that because that's exactly what we're looking for. One thing that I did at Barclays is I remember we had a contact centre, which is like where entrants go to start into banking. It was a good place to start. And I was looking at the statistics on diversity in that, and I couldn't understand why it was predominantly white. Gender diversity was okay, but particularly white. So I set a recruitment agency a task to say, like, I want to increase diversity. I want to be more representative of the communities in which we work. And so we did some online pre-interviews that were meant to eradicate any bias in applications. And I looked at the stats up to 6 months, and it was still predominantly white. So I got on my high horse and off I stomped to the recruitment agency and said, look, I've paid you a lot of money for this and I'm no better now than I was 6 months ago. What's going on? So they went away and looked at it and they came back and said, well, actually, everybody's getting through the online interviews is exactly what you wanted. In fact, probably better. But there's screening going on at Barclays before people get into interviews. Interesting. So I went back away and had a look internally. What was happening? We were getting so many applicants because we would get thousands of applicants. There was then a manual screening process by some quite junior leaders. And what they decided to do was to look for things like teamwork. So they were looking for, have you done your Duke of Edinburgh Awards or have you done all this stuff? But unconsciously, to be fair to them, again, Duke of Edinburgh Award, again, if you live in an inner city and you've got care responsibilities or you've got work in a challenging social environment, Duke of Edinburgh is the last thing you're going to do. And so unintentionally, they'd put an unconscious bias and screening in it. The minute we took that away, we got the diversity of applications. And as a leader, for me, it was about taking an interest at junior level, not just the directors that I was employing, because I was trying to look at, okay, what do I want the workforce to look like in 10 or 15 years' time? I need to start today.
Absolutely. And is there a danger we could go too far on the diversity piece? And I know we talked about that previously when we caught up. It would be great just to hear you.
Yeah. So the reason I chose my master's degree, because it talks about equity rather than equality. And there's an important difference there because equity is about making sure everybody gets the same starting point. There's this brilliant cartoon, which is basically three people at a baseball match and they're trying to look over a fence. The tall person looks over the fence, can see the match. Then you've got a middle height person who can't quite see anything. And then you've got a short person. Equality is you give them all one block. And actually what happens is the tall person can just see further and more. The middle person can now just see over the fence. The short person still can't see. Equity is you don't give the tall person any block because they can already see. You give the medium person one block, they can now see, and the short person 2 blocks. So you can argue the short person's been given more, but actually now they're in the same position. And that's what equity is all about. And it's about, okay, let's look at different populations. Why are they struggling to get in and why aren't we getting the results that we want? And therefore we do things. So Women's Network, for example, that's not about making women more advantageous in the marketplace. It's actually about making sure they're on the starting block with the men. They're getting the opportunities. So I think that's what's really important to me. And that's why I talk about equity. Now, I think if that's not understood, the pendulum can go too far. And there's 2 populations now worry me. There's working class boys, working class white boys, actually. The statistics are showing they are now doing less well in schools than other demographics. And I think that's partly because it was understood the support that was needed elsewhere, but it was taken away or not given to white working class boys who are now starting to struggle. And we need to think about that. And again, the pendulum's done too far and they've taken away stuff. So I think, the second population is white middle-aged men, particularly over 45s, that perhaps don't understand why this equity is in place and therefore are feeling a little bit disengaged. They see other populations getting the state advantage, but they don't understand the equity. So there's an education piece, but also where there's such a drive from execs and boards to get diversity, they're not necessarily getting the best candidate. And so it's all about how do you balance this? And this is the tricky thing as a leader, because there is no right answer to this. This is about being consciously aware of the challenge you've got and how do you produce that equity and the richest diversity.
It's fascinating, and I'm a mum of boys, and I was, you read about this, disengaged younger men and some of the challenges of mental health, engagement in society. So I think it's a really interesting area, isn't it? And there's always that, as you say, that danger that you can go too far. Yeah. Having said that, the importance of ensuring that women are now on an equal footing is key. And
absolutely. Absolutely. We have got to improve diversity, and I think there is an advantage and men have benefited because I think particularly younger men compared to when I had children now get much more opportunity for shared parental leave. There's things that they can do, but actually women have driven for, women have pushed and have achieved these results, particularly where you've got parental leave, but men are now benefited as well. So I think, everybody can win in this. Yeah. We've just got to be mindful of how you do it.
And at Homes England, talk a bit about your role there. Have you got a lot of female leaders within the organisation?
We have. Now, interesting, Homes England at director level, we're about 50-50. So it's a really, really good place to be. I think we've got more room to do at exec. There is 6 of us, I think, on the exec. I might have the number wrong. We have 2 female execs. So it's not 50-50. But,
good start.
It's a good start. And to be fair, again, very mindful of trying to get diversity, quality on that senior role.
And it's not only women, is it? It's cultural backgrounds and diverse communities.
Yes. In my particularly Shabai 4 directors, I have 2 white males. I have a female and 1 male from an ethnic background. So it's a mix, and it works really well.
And just sort of back onto the sort of specifically on leadership and how you become a great leader.
Yeah.
What that takes. What do you look for in people in terms of leadership quality now? Because I think it's shifted a lot in the last 20 years from that more sort of authoritative sort of leadership style through to collaboration. And obviously, we talked about there needs to be a certain level of direction. That's what people are looking to leaders for vision. But what are you looking for?
I think there's a few things to me. I remember as a junior, I stood outside the manager's office and I used to shake because I'd be like, you say an authoritarian, and it's not like that today. I think one of the things I look for is emotional intelligence. It's really, really important that people can read a room, can read people and have empathy. That's one of the things I look for. I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's habits. They've stood me in good stead throughout my career. And the one in particular I always use is seek first to understand, then be understood. We've all seen it. New boss comes in, new leader. There's an expectation on him to deliver. And he just comes in on day one and says, we're going to do this. It's going to be great. I've got this mission. It's going to be X, Y, Z. And everybody sits there saying, yeah, okay. Yeah, we've heard this before. Who are you to tell us what to do? They don't feel engaged in it. The really good leaders, what they will do in their first 60 days, they'll go around and meet as many people as they can, and they will talk to people, and they will listen. And the trick for me is, if one person says something, okay, you take it into account. If you go around and 10 people have told you the same thing, you need to deal with that. Yeah. Because if 10 different people have told you the same problem, that is an issue in the organisation. And therefore, one of the first things you have to announce after your 60 days is that you are going to address that. And that's so important because you will get buy-in, because people think, oh, listen to me. He does listen to us. He does take our views into account. And then they're more likely to buy into the other stuff that perhaps they're not necessarily convinced about, but they think, okay, I trust this leader, which is the other bit you've got to trust. It's interesting you've talked about collaboration a few times today. Collaboration is really important. I think, again, talking about pendulums, you've got to be careful that you don't go too far and try to collaborate on everything. One thing that people want from a leader is decisions and decisiveness, and know that actually, if there's an urgent decision to be made or a difficult decision to be made, you make it. There's time to collaborate. There are times when you've just got to make that decision.
And presumably failure is an important part of that learning curve to be a great leader. How important is that?
It's really interesting because I think, particularly back early on in my career, failure was just not allowed, and you'd lose your job, and it was you'd struggle to get away from it. It's really interesting when you look at entrepreneurs now. Entrepreneurs will always talk about the number of failures they had, and I think culturally that's really important. But I think as a leader, you've got to be transparent and open about it, and just say, I tried this, didn't work. Sorry, it was the best one, but actually I did learn X, Y, and Z. I learned this is something we could do, and this bit worked okay. Actually, this bit didn't, and therefore we're never going to do this again. Yeah,
that makes sense. And what are your plans? If you were looking into a glass ball and you were looking 5 years' time, what would you hope to have achieved when it comes to this sort of purpose piece, and how can you do that through Homes England?
Yeah, I think for me, it's been so inspiring working with Homes England. I mean, it is a big transition working from private sector to public sector, but it's opened my eyes to a world I didn't know existed. The fact that 150,000 children wake up in temporary accommodation every day in the United Kingdom. There's 1.6 million families on a waiting list for a house in the UK. And, I remember going to Blackpool with Homes England, and I met the leader of the council there. And she was talking to me about the temporary accommodation. And she said, look, it's not just about the temporary accommodation. It's about, one, the quality of accommodation is normally really poor. And so you've got children arriving in school who are hungry or they're tired. Therefore, they don't perform as well in their education. Equally, the parents are so desperate to give their family good accommodation, they tend to move a lot. And therefore, the children are moving from school to school to school, so they're not getting a consistent education. She was telling me that in one school in an area in Blackpool, 80% of their children turn over every year. So it's really difficult for the teachers to provide a consistent education because they continue having to revisit where a child is. And so for me, it's about that house and providing those houses to enable the kids to get a stable background, to then have the education that they deserve, that in the future will help them on to better jobs and a better life. And so it's thinking not just about that roof above their head, but actually what that will provide to them in the future. It's really funny when you talk to, I had some in my local village, people were complaining about some new houses being built. So I got my high walls and all the rest of it and said, well, it's about 150,000 children. And they said, well, but these are modern detached houses, they're not going to help the people that handle these children. I said, no, you're missing the point. We need to create the chain. So we need people out of these new houses that they can afford, because further down the chain, it will relieve the accommodation that the starter homes and the first-time buyers can afford. So it's going to be interesting. Labour have come in with a mission to deliver 1.5 million houses. It's ambitious. It's never been done before. I'm apolitical. I don't support any particular party. My job is to support the government of the day. And it's excited to be part and see how that's delivered.
Absolutely. And talk about that. You mentioned the shift from private to the public sector and leadership. How have you had to adapt your leadership style in a different environment?
Yes. But you've got multiple stakeholders. So, technically Homes England is a private company, but it's wholly owned by the government. It's a delivery agent to the government. So whilst, like any other company, I've got a CEO as a boss, I've got a board I'm accountable to. I'm also accountable to the Ministry of Housing and ultimately to housing ministers and accountable to Parliament. And also I'm very cognizant that anything I do or say is in the public domain, which is interesting as a leader, because you're always thinking, okay, if this was in the media or I got called before a select committee of Parliament, how would this look? So it does make you very much more conscious of what you say, what you do, but for the good, because I think you probably put more thought into your decisions.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's really interesting. I think I take more time to reflect now before I make a decision, because I'm looking at multiple lenses, which perhaps I didn't in the private sector, because I sort of knew what the board wanted. I knew what the CEO wanted to do, and therefore I was delivering against very much a corporate objective.
And a pace, presumably.
And a pace, yeah, absolutely. Whereas here, I do have a bit more of a time. It was interesting last year. So I look after Help to Buy, and we had some issues with our call centre, which were horrendous. It was a horrendous experience for people. There's 250,000 customers in Help to Buy, as opposed to 40, 50 million at Barclays. If Barclays had that issue, it might get some press, but not a huge amount. During that period, we were in every newspaper every single day. There was a piece on BBC One show, so primetime TV. I was having to speak to the housing minister on a daily basis. So that problem for a relatively small population, because it was public sector, quite rightly, because taxpayers are funding it, I was under the spotlight. And I was, the actions of Homes England were being questioned very publicly. And so that's something you have to be prepared for in the public sector. You are a public servant.
Yeah.
And you have to accept that and be able to work in that way.
You touched on empathy a little while ago as a leader. And I think this is interesting. I was listening to a podcast which was interviewing the founders and CEO of Netflix, and they talked about the kind of the leadership style. And actually, it was interesting because they actually sort of slightly went against the concept that actually it is about people and empathy. And they talked about actually you needed someone who was quite cutthroat in some of these leadership roles. And it was interesting conversation. And I think I'm interested in your view on, in the past, often the CEO was CFO before potentially came from a more financial route. Yeah. Whereas I think now people are sort of saying, actually, really the CEO should be that empathetic, people-led person more so. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, again, it comes back to what I said earlier. Empathy doesn't mean you don't make difficult decisions. When you're a CEO or you're a leader, you have to make difficult decisions. And sometimes those are unpopular. And being a leader doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the most popular person in the organisation.
Yeah.
You've got to get over that. It's like I always say, for all the people in your organisation, the one thing they've got in common is you. Therefore, they're going to talk about you. So you've got to get over that. But equally, you need to empathise. And you think, okay, how are people feeling? So, for example, if I was in a difficult decision in previous roles where I had to do redundancy, that might be the right business decision to do. But I would be very mindful of the impact on those people's lives.
Yeah.
That somebody has got to go home and say, this is the situation. Therefore, what support can we give? And I still think, and use that example, corporates have got a long way to go. They very often provide outsourcing, which are career consultants. Yeah. Coming back to your point earlier about men, actually the bigger impact for men will be the psychological and mental health impacts. And very few corporates, to my knowledge, provide the mental health support when you're in that situation. They focus on outsourcing and getting career support, which is important. But actually, you need to think, how are you going to tell your family? I've just delivered this decision to you. How are you going to do it? Leaders need to understand that what they're doing constantly is change. Now, some people are really adaptable and they're fine with change. Other people, the smallest change can really have an impact. So you have to think about every decision, what's the impact on your colleagues and what's the impact on your customers as well.
Yeah.
And that's where the empathy comes. But don't let it start you making those difficult decisions.
It's a hard one, isn't it? So it's a tough job to have in those leadership roles. And if someone's listening now and thinking, what is it going to take for me to move up the ladder to be that leader? What are the 3 things I need to really think about? You've probably talked around them today. Could you just sort of summarise what you think those 3 aspects should be?
Yeah, so somebody gave me advice early on in my career, which was great, was find somebody you aspire to be. So somebody who's been successful and you think, I really like to be like them. I like their values. I like the way they do things. I like to speak. And really analyse that person. I mean, if you're lucky, it's somebody who's written an autobiography so you can read some other stuff. And then pick out what is it you really like. And then think about, well, that's the type of leader I want to be in the future. Because one of the things I will say is you need to build these early on in your career. And therefore, actually identifying those will help you. Write them down and always keep true to them. Because you'll be successful because it resonates with you and you'll feel passionate about it. The second thing is find out what you don't like and do things that are a bit outside your box to find out whether you would like them. I mean, in my career, I did this role for 18 months on internal audit. I hated it. It was awful. No offense to auditors on the call. But what it made me realise is I'm a people person. I like working with people. I'm not great at sitting in a room number crunching and looking at spreadsheets all day and ticking boxes. It's not me. But I enjoy talking to people. So I'm glad I did it. And I did it early on in my career because then I always knew never to apply for a role, which quite frankly, if I did it at senior level, I'd get fired if I made a mistake. It wasn't a problem at junior level. So I would do that. And I think the third one, which is really interesting today now, is work for as many different employees as you can. I don't mean every 6 months, but, every 3 or 4 years, maybe reflect. I had a brilliant career working at Barclays and I worked there 30 years and it was fantastic. I was so lucky to be taken from an 18-year-old making cups of tea to a managing director in a global bank.
Right.
It was great. But I think culturally the world has changed and there are so many opportunities there now. I can see people doing 3 or 4 years in one employer, go work somewhere else, and maybe they'll come back again. But as they come back again, they'll be a much better person for it.
It's that expertise, isn't it? That kind of depth of experience and
the culture. And the cultures. Every organisation is different in culture. And if you do it early in your career, you'll understand what you like what you don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's been so interesting going through all these topics with you today, Ian. I've got a final question for you, which is around you're starting in a new role tomorrow as CEO and you have your first board meeting. What is your first agenda point or the key agenda point you want to sort of, kick off with?
People. Look, I mean, you could only deliver through people, and that's either your colleagues or it's your customers. And I use customers in its broadest sense. I don't necessarily consumers. So I would see the government as my customer because they've asked me to deliver something. Because you can do all the technology you like. You can improve. You can use AI increasingly. All fantastic things, and absolutely we should be talking about. But unless you've got the culture right for your people, you will not succeed.
Thank you so much. Those words of wisdom. It's been great talking to you.
It's been great being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me and Ian. It's been so great to hear from him with regards to his experience when it comes to leadership and purpose in business. If you enjoyed the conversation, please do connect with us and follow us. You can find us on all the normal podcast channels, so Spotify, Apple and YouTube. You can also find us on our LinkedIn page at Ambitious PR or our website ambitiouspr.co.uk/thoughtful leadership.